Robert Plank Show, episode 313, CPA on Fire. Market yourself, set up the proper legal business structure, and save more of the money you earn with Josh Bauerle. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the show. Our guest is Josh Bauerle from CPA on Fire, and he's going to be talking about lots of cool accounting stuff and talking about how he built up his business. So Mr. Josh, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I'm glad that you're here. So can you kind of tell us what you do and what makes you stand out?
Yeah, so I'm a CPA. I'm the founder of CPAonfire.com. We are a tax and accounting firm that specializes working almost entirely with the online entrepreneurs. So basically anyone who does their business online, e-commerce sellers, internet marketers, anything like that, we work with them. And we got into that niche by working with Entrepreneur on Fire, and that's kind of where the name CPAonfire.com came from. And they're if you've heard the podcast Entrepreneur on Fire, I think they're still one of the top podcasts on iTunes. And started working with him, and slowly got into the internet entrepreneur niche, and here we are.
Awesome stuff. So you kind of found your niche within a niche, and then yeah, like I only kind of check out Entrepreneur on Fire guy like every once in a while, and I noticed that he has like his like monthly income reports, and I used to think like maybe like a year or two ago I was like, oh, what's all this like tax advice written? I would just scroll past that to get to the numbers, and then I started noticing like, whoa, actually there's some like useful and some sort of like timely stuff, like the questions that are on there and the things he's answering are kind of like relevant to like whatever I'm kind of dealing with, that particular year tax wise. So I was like, oh, but maybe this guy kind of has something. So that's pretty cool. And so a CPA for entrepreneurs specifically. And so I'm glad that you're kind of on the show today, because I don't know, like when I talk to CPAs, especially when I ask them about like the things that internet marketers kind of need to know, I kind of either the answer is like something that's like way super vague, like we need to have like one of these like 5 or 6 entities, and then like, oh, go talk to your accountant about that, or it's something that's like really specific, like they tell me some story about certain things they did accounting wise and wrote stuff off, and like neither one is kind of helpful. So like, have you kind of like come across that in any way, like looking at your competitors or looking at like the advice that's dished out about that?
Yeah, we kind of get a bad rap as not being able to communicate very well. Apparently, there's a little bit of a disconnect between actually doing taxes and kind of communicating what you're doing with people. So, yeah, I do feel like that's where we have an advantage. I think we do a pretty good job of being able to break it down in terms that the average business owner can understand.
Cool. And I've noticed, and also I watched, there was some clip of you on some morning show, and I just noticed about at least the advice you gave there was, your advice was very like sort of if-then statements, as opposed to like, overwhelming with a bunch of possibilities. It was like, well, if your income is this, do that. If your situation is this, do that. And that sort of made a lot more sense. So sort of along those lines, like, what have you kind of done in order to make this whole like accounting, tax kind of thing interesting? Because I noticed that early on it bored me to tears, like my eyes kind of glazed over, and then after a couple of years of like probably paying too much in taxes, I started realizing like, okay, well, if this advice saves me 20 grand, 30 grand every single year, then that's worth listening to. But it definitely took me a long time to kind of get into that sort of mindset of being excited about accounting and taxes and business entities. So I mean, any sort of advice about that on how to make taxes interesting?
Yeah, I think anytime that you can show people exactly how it's going to correlate to their money and put more money in their pockets, that gets people interested. So like you said, it's most people their eyes are going to glaze over if you start to say, there's 5 business entities you can choose from, and they're very important for taxes and legal liability, like blah, 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 right? But if I can tell you, like, look, if you're making over $30,000 per year in your business and you're not an S corporation, you could be throwing $5,000, $10,000, even $15,000 per year away in taxes. That means something, right? That's $5,000 more in your pocket. So I think with pretty much anything you're selling, but especially something like taxes, it's showing people how it impacts their bottom line, how it affects them personally, and kind of getting them involved in the process.
Awesome. It makes a lot of sense. So along those sort of lines of, showing everybody what kind of money they can save, is there sort of like a starting point or a low-hanging fruit, or like some sort of like universal kind of like guidelines as far as like what all of us entrepreneurs like should be doing tax-wise, or maybe something we're all missing out on?
Yeah, I mean, it depends what area you're talking. I would say there's a few kind of universal truths that I tell most entrepreneurs. The first one is bookkeeping. If you're a business owner, you've got to have that bookkeeping in place, meaning you have to separate your business and personal finances. You've got to have a separate bank account. You've got to have a separate credit card that you run just your business through. You've got to be tracking those income and expenses throughout the year, because the biggest mistake we see a lot of new entrepreneurs making, they come to us come tax time, they want us to prepare their taxes, and they have a shoebox full of receipts, and that's how they kind of track their expenses throughout the year. Right? If you want to be on top of the game, if you want to make sure you're paying as little in taxes as possible, you got to be monitoring that throughout the year. You've got to know exactly what you spent your money on. So you got to say, okay, I brought $100,000 in, I spent $5,000 on advertising, I spent $10,000 on travel, I spent $2,000 on meals and entertainment, whatever it is. You got to be able to break it down. And that's not only true for taxes, right? I mean, that's how you grow your business. If you can look at it, how can you possibly know where you can improve if you can't track what's going on? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, because I mean, we might just have this sort of nagging problem that's like always there, and just because we didn't take that little bit of time to look at the big picture, then we never know it was there. And I feel like my mindset early on as far as this tax stuff was, I was kind of like what you just described there. I was like, I'll dump out my PayPal and my ClickBank transaction, and I'll just like give it over to my accountant, and my accountant had no idea what he was looking at. And then once I kind of broke through that, and I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna have to be a little bit hands-on as far as like cleaning stuff up, and maybe I'll like calculate the totals, and I'll do a little bit of categorizing on my own. That way I can just kind of give that sort of those numbers to my accountant. And then I realized that like every year it's kind of become like easier and easier, and every year I've kind of tacked on like a little bit more. But it was just like it took me a while to kind of break through that kind of mental block of saying, well, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole of accounting stuff. And then once I did, there were like a little bit of growing pains. And then once I broke through that sort of second stage, then now I can kind of see that big picture, sort of like how you just said. Well, if you say, well, there's $100,000 going into that, $50,000 going into that. Once I kind of broke through the details, the minutia, then now I kind of have more of like a big picture in kind of simple math, simple numbers that I can kind of keep in my head now.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is. And I'll say this too, bookkeeping isn't fun, and it's time consuming. And if it's something that you're not going to do yourself, there's plenty of companies out there that will take your bookkeeping off your hands. Some of them at very reasonable prices, maybe $100, $150, $200 a month. And go ahead and hire someone like that if you want to, if that's what's going to take to get it done. But you need to be having those numbers, and you should be able to go at any point in the year and say, okay, year to date, I've made this much, I've spent this much, this is what I can do to improve.
Awesome. So get that bookkeeping in order. Have a separate business and personal account, separate bank account, separate credit card. And if the bookkeeping is too rough for you, then go and hire someone to kind of get those numbers in order, because tax time is too late. And so, I mean, is there anything like in general that that entrepreneurs should be like looking at to kind of get ahead of the taxes to maybe save money down the road?
Yeah, so I'd say the next thing that we always tell people once they really start to get their business going is you need to look at the proper business entity, like we were talking about earlier. And for most people, they're going to be looking at three forms of business entities that might make sense. One is a sole proprietor, meaning you don't even have to set anything up. You just start a business, hit the ground running. You don't file any paperwork, and you just go. All right, if you're just getting started, this is perfectly fine. The next step up that we see people go into is an LLC, or a limited liability company. And what this is going to do is going to sort of act like a wall between you and your business. All right. So instead of you and your business being the same thing, there's you and then there's your business. And surprisingly, there's actually no tax benefits to doing this. You'll have a lot of people try and tell you to set up an LLC because there's tax advantages. There are none. It works the exact same way as a sole proprietor. But where there potentially is benefits are legal protection. So if your business starts to get to the point where you start to think, hey, maybe you're doing construction, right? And hey, I could do something and someone could get hurt, and I don't want people to come after my personal assets. That's when you start to look at a limited liability company that can separate the two. And then once your business is starting to really become profitable, and you're hitting $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 per year in profit, and by profit we simply mean the income that's left after all of your expenses, that's when you want to start to consider an S corporation. And an S corporation, it works very similarly to an LLC, but it can save you quite a bit in taxes. But if you're making $50,000 per year and switch to an S corp, you could potentially save $5,000 per year in taxes. $100,000, you could be saving $10,000 per year in taxes. So these aren't small amounts, and this is a super important thing that people have to get right as a business entity.
Awesome. So, and I, like I said, like I really like the way that you laid that sort of logic out on the morning show that you were at, and especially because that it's sort of like there's a very clear timeline there, right? It's like start with the sole prop, and then once you grow, move to the LLC, move to the S corp, and if you're already super far along, then you can do that. But like that makes a lot more sense as opposed to like here's a billion different sort of things to worry about there. And so sort of along those lines of like getting like the right things in place and the right sort of structures in place. Like one thing I kind of noticed about the Entrepreneur on Fire income reports, and I noticed like Pat Flynn kind of does the same thing. It seems like a lot of these online businesses, they're pulling in 100, 200, 300 grand a year, but then they're only taking out like a few thousand a month for their own personal income, and they're like just dumping in like huge amounts back into sort of advertising. So I mean, is there like a term for that, or did John Lee Dumas like do that before you came along, or was that your idea, or like what's the story with those sorts of businesses set up in that way?
Yeah, so I'd say a couple things there. Number one, what you see them paying themselves as salary may not necessarily be all that they're paying themselves. So when you're a business, there's two forms of payments. You can pay yourself an actual salary if you're an S corporation, but on top of the salary, you can give yourself a distribution. And all that is transferring money from the business to you personally, and that's not going to show up as their expenses, right? It's kind of a complicated formula, but a distribution is a non-taxable event where the business just distributes money to you. And I guess let me start here first. The way a business is taxed, an LLC, a sole proprietor, an S corp, it's all the same. They're what they call pass-through entities, which means the profits of those business, they don't get taxed on the business level. They pass through to you personally, and you pay those taxes on your personal income tax return. Okay, so what the IRS says is, since you're already paying taxes on these profits, you can take money from the business and pay it to yourself whenever you want without incurring any additional taxes. So just because you see on Entrepreneur on Fire or Pat Flynn's income statement that they only paid themselves a $5,000 salary that month, they could very easily have taken another $20,000 as distributions, just as an example. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But I don't want people to fall into the trap of thinking, I have to reinvest every single penny possible back into my business. So it is possible that they are taking more out than that, and that it could be very well be fine for you to take more out than that. But I think with any business, a question like that just comes down to return on investment. So you could pay yourself $5,000 maybe, or you could put that $5,000 back into the business and turn $5,000 into $15,000. So it all comes down to your business, what you need personally income-wise, and what you can turn that money into by reinvesting it in the business.
Awesome. And so, I mean, is that kind of thing, was that your idea? Was that his idea? And I mean, is there like a number someone should like look at? Should they look to like, reinvest like half the money? Or, I mean, what are your kind of thoughts on that as far as like how much to leave in, how much to pull out?
That's what I'm gonna kind of have to fall back on the answer that accountants like to give on it depends, because so much of it depends on your situation. I mean, I have clients that make a lot of money in their business, and they distribute almost all of it out to themselves personally because they have almost no overhead in their business, right? So it really just depends on what type of business you have and how much more you can make by putting it back into your business. So if spending $5,000 more on advertising is going to bring in $10,000 more, $15,000 more in revenue, that's a no-brainer. So to me, the first step is you need to figure out how much money you need and want personally, right? So if that number is $10,000 per month, then from there you start to look at it and say, okay, on top of this $10,000 per month, I could take out this $5,000 and give myself a bonus, or I could put it back into the business. If I put it back into the business, what's my return on investment on that? And that to me, this goes right back to you have to know your numbers at all time, right? Because you can look at it and say, okay, I made $100,000 by spending $10,000 on advertising. What would happen if I spent $15,000 on advertising? And that's why knowing your numbers, you can kind of come to conclusions like that.
Awesome. I mean, that makes perfect sense, and I think that yeah. I mean, once again, looking back and thinking back to like maybe like years ago when I didn't quite have as good of a handle on like the money coming in and stuff like that. Sometimes I would pull money in just to like have more of the padding in the bank account, just so that I can kind of feel better about myself. And once I realize that, well, this money isn't really serving any kind of a purpose, and if anything, it's kind of sitting there, and I can have it sit there in the business, then that was like kind of like a I started to make better decisions. I noticed if I kind of like you said, like kind of knew like the big picture and like knew those kinds of numbers. So I mean, so that still makes perfect sense there. And that sort of leads me to the next thing of that, all this like sort of accounting stuff. It's kind of like a thing where like every year I kind of pick up a little more, or like I know a few more questions to ask my accountant, or he'll ask me a question and I'll say, well, I'll pass that along to the other accountant that me and my business partner have as like our entity for that. And so I feel like I kind of like pick up a little bit every single year, but then there's still like all these sort of holes in my knowledge. So is there like a good like resource or a starting point where people can kind of know some of these basic things that we've been talking about so far today?
Yeah, I mean, anytime you either have a business or are starting a business, you kind of want to know the basics. And it's something I would say you don't want to know the advanced stuff. I mean, there's you can if you want, I guess, but that's where you want to hire a professional and be able to rely on them so you can focus on your business. But it's always great to know the basics and like you said, to know what questions to ask your CPA, because even if you have a great CPA, they're not going to know the ins and outs of your business. So they may miss something simply because they don't know. So you need to know to ask them, hey, I went and took a trip this year to Japan, and while I was there, I did a conference. Is that deductible? And that's where your CPA can step in and say, yeah, it's potentially deductible. Did you do this, this, and this? So to me, the knowledge that you should know is just what questions you should be asking your CPA. And I mean, there's certainly books out there that I don't know any offhand. They can websites like mine, cpaonfire.com. We have a lot of the articles on the basics on what to know on the basics. But I mean, Google can be your friend there. I mean, you could, what kind of travel can I deduct in my business? Just Googling something like that. And it's not something that, okay, I read this article on Google, now I can prepare my own taxes. It's okay, I read about this, now I need to ask my CPA, does this apply to me?
Awesome, makes a lot of sense. So that way, so we need to know like what questions to ask, and that doesn't mean we can do our own taxes, but at least we kind of can make those sort of more informed decisions and stuff like that. So I mean, so great. And so you have this CPA practice, and you have all these clients, and I'm really curious, like how you personally sort of built that up. I mean, first of all, like how many years have you been doing this, and like when did you start and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so I guess I've been doing accounting and taxes for what years? 2000, about 10 years now, actually. And I started my own business in 2012, so about 5 years ago. And to get started, I actually took over a little bit of a client base from an older guy that was getting out of the business, and he just kind of said, hey, come do the taxes for my clients, and I'll give you 33% of the revenue, I think it was, which was an awesome way to start because I didn't have to start from scratch, right? I was married at that point. We kind of relied on my income, so I didn't have to build the business completely from scratch. But the other thing he said was, when I got in, and I said, hey, that's fine, I'll do yours, but I also want to be able to build my own part of the business, and I want to keep 100% of anything I do myself. And he said, sure, that's fine. So once I got to the point about 2 years in where I was making enough on my own to replace what I was doing for him, I stopped doing his and focused completely on that. And I think the biggest area that I was able to build my business in is doing podcasts like this. Big one obviously was Entrepreneur on Fire because they're huge and were huge at the time. So just going on there once a month was huge for my business. And then from there, what happens is people find you and say, oh, hey, I heard you on Entrepreneur on Fire. Can you come on my podcast and talk about the same type of stuff? So it kind of snowballs from there. I heard Damon John from Shark Tank once recently on a podcast, and he said the new OPM, which people used to think of as other people's money, the new way to think of it is other people's marketing, right? So how can I tap into someone's audience so John Lee Dumas built this huge audience with Entrepreneur on Fire. How can I tell him that I can add value to his audience, and in turn, his audience is going to come to me for the services I offer.
Awesome. So, I mean, how did that relationship sort of work out? You just contacted him to appear on the show, and you were just like a repeat guest, and it grew from there?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. It was early on when Entrepreneur on Fire was just getting going, and I was listening to the podcast, and I emailed him, and I just said, hey, if you're looking for more guests, I'm a CPA, and I own my own business, and I'd be happy to come on. And he said, I'm not looking for guests, but I am looking for a CPA. So from there, I kind of took over Entrepreneur on Fire's taxes and accounting, and he liked what I did and started kind of incorporating me into Entrepreneur on Fire. So giving tax tips on his income report, doing podcasts with him, things like that.
Awesome. And I mean, there's a really good just lesson in general in there. Like it can't hurt to shoot an email, and you never know if that sort of reaching out leads to something unexpected but still beneficial to everyone, or if it leads to lots of other open doors. So awesome stuff. So you've built up. So you have your CPA on Fire site, your blog, and you appear on other podcasts as a guest. And then you do some of the like the guest blogging for Entrepreneur on Fire's income reports. Is that pretty much it? Is that pretty much like the extent of your online business as far as getting new clients, or is there any more than that?
That's basically it at this point. We're constantly looking to find ways to tap into other people's audiences where we can add value to their audience. So podcast is a big one. Blogging is a big one. I'm actually on the verge of signing to write a couple books with a company that does things like that. So taxes for small business, accounting for small business. But yeah, I mean, I think the key to all of it is, can you provide value to them and their audience? And if you can do that, people will want you to have contact with their audience.
Awesome stuff. And so in addition to the books, I mean, anything cool on the horizon? Like any plans for like a podcast of your own or anything like that?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I was actually just right before our podcast interview, I was talking with another online kind of bookkeeping company, and we're just strategizing how we can come up with new things for online businesses. And definitely have some ideas for some membership sites, podcasts. So everything's on the table right now. But I think my goal at this point is to figure out ways to help people without necessarily preparing their taxes. So we get a lot of people that say, look, I got a new business. I can't afford to hire you as my CPA. How can I learn the basics? Kind of like what you asked earlier. And I'd love to be able to have a membership course where you can say, okay, just purchase this course, and that's going to give you all the basics where at least when you're first starting, you can do things yourself.
Awesome. And sort of along those lines, like when you've been doing like your blogging and like one-on-one stuff and all those different things, have you sort of noticed like the same sort of like talking points, or are you sort of getting to the point where like you're figuring out like your branding or your usual like kind of go-to shtick and things like that, like your elevator pitch and all that?
Yeah, I would say the nice thing about the podcasting world is you don't necessarily have to break it all down into an elevator pitch, but it's definitely you see repeating patterns of, okay, these are the questions that I'm going to be asked on a podcast, and this is where I can add value to the audience by talking about these specific things, like why someone should become an S corp and why bookkeeping is important and things like that.
Awesome. Well, cool. And yeah, and a lot of this, I can relate to some of this because like the way that I sort of picture, like, you know, what I do as a business person is like, I'm just like a computer programmer. And in a lot of ways, like I had to kind of sexify things up, or like you said, like try to avoid the one-on-one stuff as much as possible in favor of, you know, having the leverage to like have a blog, have a course. And so I can definitely relate to kind of being in a field that is looked of as like nerdy, and a lot of people don't even want to touch it. They just want to have you like push the magic button. So I think there's a lot of like good advice in here for me and for other people listening in, you know, whatever their skill is, whatever their niche is, as far as kind of taking something where there's definitely like a usual limit to the amount of income if you kind of did it the traditional way, but by doing this internet stuff, we can kind of have more kind of possibilities and cool stuff like that. So, I mean, as far as you building up your business and all that, have you made any like huge mistakes along the way, or is there like anything big where like you kind of wish you could have a do-over?
Definitely mistakes every single day. I mean, there's been countless times where I thought we had a great idea. I mean, there was 3 years ago we kind of launched what we thought would be an amazing membership site, and looking back, it wasn't the right time, it wasn't the right format. So I'm trying to think of a specific example I could give on something I would do differently. But I mean, make no mistake, like the thing with being in business is, or any entrepreneur, is you're constantly going to be failing. And if you're not, then you're not trying enough new things, right? You got to constantly be saying, okay, where can I push the envelope here? Where can I get out of my comfort zone? What's this new idea I can try? And you're going to fail at most of them. And all you need is 1 out of every 10, 1 out of every 20, even 1 out of every 100 to work in order for your business to work. So I would say the biggest lesson I've learned is you have to constantly be willing to fail. You have to constantly be willing for people to say no to you. And every once in a while it's going to work. And when that does, it makes up for all the no's and all the failures and more.
Awesome. That's really good advice. And I think that, that, the way I look at some of that stuff is like, not only am I willing to fail, but I also kind of need to do things a lot. I need to fail faster, right? Like as far as like that membership site that you guys put out where like the timing wasn't quite right. Like usually in that sort of situation, I'm thinking like, man, well, if I can get all that in place in like a month as opposed to 6 months, then that failure only costs me, a month to get to the next sort of project and to like sort of get that out of the way. And I kind of look at that the same way as far as like when I like do my taxes every year, or I calculate my numbers like every couple of months. I'm not super good at it, but I kind of look at it as like every time I do it, I kind of get the checklist a little bit down, or like some sort of procedure that took me a long time, I can do it a lot faster. And so do you have any sort of secrets as far as along those lines, as far as just like productivity wise, like to get that failure to come faster so that you can get to the good stuff?
No, I mean, I guess exactly what you said. It's one, not committing a ton of time and resources to things you're not sure about. I mean, like that membership course, it would have been if I would have committed $20,000 in 6 months of my business to it, like I'd be devastated, right? But
Right.
It was something where it was okay. Maybe we can commit $500 in a couple weeks time, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, we're not out that much. So I think that's a key for me, is knowing that unless it's a home run idea that I know from the start, I'm not going to commit to it until I know what the return is. I think that's kind of the great part about the internet and how you can create businesses with super low overhead. Like 20 years ago, 30 years ago, if I wanted to start a CPA firm, I have to go rent an office building, and I have to set up phone systems, and I have to hire a secretary and employees, and I'm out $50,000 before I even bring in my first revenue and know if this is going to work. Now I can say, okay, all I need is my computer. I can purchase some tax software for a couple $1,000s, and from there I hit the ground running, right? So if it fails, I'm out very little money, and I can know quickly whether it's going to work or not. So the internet's definitely a game changer, and I think the opportunity is there for anything you want to do. You can test it before you commit huge dollars and huge time to it.
Awesome, great advice. So sort of test the concept first, so that way you can prove to yourself and prove to others that it works, and then you can go ahead and dump the big bucks into it and really go crazy with it after you've proven that it can somehow work in some sort of form. Well, so great stuff. And I like that we kind of jumped around, talked about a lot of topics, right? Talked about talked about entrepreneurs, talked about money. And so, I mean, do you see, like, when you look at other entrepreneurs and stuff like that, do you see like any like big money mistake? I mean, not necessarily taxes, but just like a mistake you just keep seeing all these entrepreneurs you're working with like making over and over?
I'm trying to think of a recurring one. I mean, a big one is not having their taxes and bookkeeping in shape. That's the one that we're going to run into most often. People that are 2 years behind on tax returns and owe the IRS $50,000 just in penalties and interest because they just never bothered to file their taxes. So I would say that this is something you want to get squared away right from the start. Make sure your bookkeeping is in place. Make sure you have the proper tax structure, the proper tax strategy in place from the start.
Awesome, good advice. And even though that seems really simplistic, I mean, that's huge because, like, yeah, I imagine a lot of people kind of have that entrepreneurial mindset of like, I'm just going to jump in, I'm just going to cowboy it. Like, if they come after me, I'll deal with it then. And it's like, well, like, the IRS is going to get their money. And I heard this one story a few months ago. I think it was in like Tony Robbins' Money book or something like that. And they were saying like, there's that whole idea of like, if you double a penny every day for 30 days, you'll be a millionaire. But then if you get taxed a certain percentage on that doubling, it's only going to equal like $100,000. So I mean, and that really kind of clicked with me as far as like, okay, this tax thing, like, even though everyone hates it, it does kind of suck. We all have to deal with it, and if we can kind of get ahead of it and play a better game than everyone else, then maybe it won't suck as much, and we'll be excited at how much more money we're keeping and we're making and stuff like that, as opposed to if we didn't take this seriously and we'd have this whole headache a whole entire life. So I mean, really good stuff, and I appreciate the advice that you came on and had to share with us today. And I want to make sure that everyone knows exactly where to find all the cool stuff that Mr. Josh Bauerle has to offer. So I know you mentioned a couple URLs, but do you want to kind of re-mention those, as well as like anything people you think should check out?
Yeah, so they can find me at cpaonfire.com. If you're interested in the business entity stuff that we kind of talked about, the LLCs, the S corps, that kind of stuff, we did create a free course that you can check out that goes into more detail about which entity is best for you. They can find that at cpmfire.com/firenation. And if anyone just wants to reach out to me directly, they can always reach me at josh@cpmfire.com.
Awesome. Makes it super simple. 3 ways to do it. So go to cpaonfire.com to check out what Josh is doing, what Josh is up to, what he's blogging about. Go to cpaonfire.com/firenation to get that free guide on what kind of entity to set up. And if you have any kind of questions or anything to ask Josh about, or if you want to become one of his clients or whatever it is, you can email him at josh@cpaonfire.com. So I want to thank you so much, Mr. Josh, for stopping by the show and kind of bearing with us and switching lots of gears and talking and cramming a lot of stuff into this episode. So thanks for stopping by and for dishing some of that knowledge and sharing all that cool stuff.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Have you had a chance to rate and review the show yet? If not, go right now to robertplank.com/iTunes, click the View in iTunes button, and click the Ratings tab. We would really appreciate a 5-star rating, or whatever you think is fair, plus a quick 1-sentence review to tell us how we're doing. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.